Hello, everybody. It is Steve, your friendly neighborhood lawn gnome. Welcome back to another video over here on That's Comical. And if you're watching and it happens to be a Wednesday, happy new comic book day. Andy is here tonight. Andy, I'm hoping that you're doing well.
Yep, doing good and happy to be here. This is going to be a fun one, our uh,
I
our
hope so.
sidestep episode.
Yeah, exactly. You took the words right out of my mouth. So, of course, today, if Andy's here, that means we're definitely doing an ultimate journey. And today we're back on the Marvel side, going towards the road to the 2015 Secret Wars. But instead of going forward, we're actually going to be taking a little bit of a sidestep. And believe it or not, date wise, in regards to the comics, we're going to be going a little bit backwards because we're actually going to be taking a look at a comic that was released before our starting point here on the road to Secret Wars, which was House of M. And ironically, it also involves the same creator. So we are going to be taking a look at the brand new story arc of our road to Secret Wars, which is the well-known and popular Ultimate Marvel Universe. So before we get into the book itself, what was the Ultimate Universe? I mean, if you are reading comics now, you probably see the brand new Ultimate Universe that, people are saying good things, people are saying not so good things. I'm reading a lot of the titles already, so I have things to say about those at another point in time. But the original Ultimate Universe took place and originally was released in 2000, and it was headed by a creative mind that was not so well known at the time. And this was pretty much one of his major launching points. And that, of course, was Brian Michael Bendis. And he came to Marvel with the idea of, we're now officially in the 21st century. Let's try and do something very interesting and different. Instead of disrupting the Marvel universe right now, the main stories, the main lore, let's create a brand new Marvel universe that is based on more modern tones and modern themes, so we can not only get some new readers on board who might be afraid of tackling all the history that Marvel Comics already has, 50 plus years at that point, but let's give them a good place to start, and let's give them familiar faces with a couple of different twists, so to speak. And it started with Ultimate Spider-Man by Brian Michael Bendis, and it was a huge success. And then there were a couple of more titles, but we're not going to be discussing those titles. We're actually going to be talking about one of the later titles, one that actually came out 4 years after the Ultimate Universe began. And we're doing this because it is very integral to the road to Secret Wars, and that, of course, is Ultimate Fantastic Four. This is a killer book. This is a book that has a great series of people on it, and this is just the first story arc. This book was co-written by Brian Michael Bendis and another one of my favorite writers out there, Mark Miller. The penciling is done by Adam Kubert, and the inking is done by Danny Mickey. So this is, bar none, one of the hottest staffs to grace a comic book at that time. And they were all part of the first story arc of the Ultimate Fantastic Four, which is actually called The Fantastic. So I've done a lot of talking, Andy. You've barely said a word. I'm so sorry about that. But so this is where we're starting with our brand new story arc to the road to Secret
Yeah.
Wars.
Yeah, and let me jump in and say I know that kind of our ultimate journey is not so much a review kind of thing like we normally do, but we often offer our 2 cents. And not to bury the lead here, I want to say this book rules. I had so much fun reading this, and there's a lot to say about the ultimate journey. I think Steve, you did a great overview right there. I think it continues to remain relevant. These stories, a lot of times, certain arcs, you could think of them as kind of like the Batman year ones of the Marvel universe, kind of these fresh takes. Taking a close look at these characters that we already have a long history with, reinventing them, but really kind of recontextualizing them is more what it is. So, obviously, Fantastic Four, Marvel's first family, like getting to see them with this more modern take, with the years and years and years of Marvel history and the level of seriousness that can be brought to comics now, is just awesome. And that's something that, I'm a fan of the Ultimate Universe. Context here, I've read a lot of stuff from the Ultimate Universe, way more than I really realized until we sat down and started mapping this out. Um, and I wouldn't go as far as to say that like this is my Marvel, but I know it like the back of my hand, I realize. So anyway, this is a really great book, a really cool look at these characters, and I'm excited to kind of go through it beat by beat because as we take this journey towards Secret Wars, this might be, even though we've gone further back in time than where we have at any other point in this starts to feel to me like really where we're diving into what this journey is going to culminate and lead to, the first like
Absolutely.
really meaty chunk of it. Uh,
Absolutely. And you'll definitely, audience, see that as we proceed a little bit more forward into this story arc. The most important thing that I personally want to say about the Ultimate Universe is this is the easiest way that you can create something fresh and new based upon characters that have been established for so many years and not piss anybody off. Because you're basically creating a whole new universe. So you basically have a whole new sandbox to play in. And you can do certain things that you probably shouldn't do with the main universe because it's going to make a lot of fanboys angry out there. So the fact that you now have this brand new sandbox and you can do things by still keeping those core elements of those characters, but just adding some different ideas and some different twists. And of course, one of the most important things about the Ultimate Universe, especially when we go a little bit deeper into this world, these books are the inspiration for the Marvel Cinematic Universe that we know today.
and that's a really major thing to point out too. It's kind of, I make the reference like it's kind of the year one in some ways, looking back at the history of these characters, and really has become in some cases really the version of these characters that get thought of more in pop culture. In the sense that an MCU take on some of these characters is the most prevalent one. A lot of them are heavily informed by the Ultimate Universe and this take on it. There wouldn't be an MCU as we know it without the Ultimate Universe. So it just goes to show you how influential this was. So it's not as simple as let's take a fresh universe, retell some stories. It's more than a fresh coat of paint. They revitalized these characters in a way that keeps them fresh. This is a good book. This is about to be fun.
Yeah, I'm also really glad that we're finally tackling Fantastic Four. I mean,
Yeah.
this is the most appropriate year, maybe outside of the fact that just a few years back we celebrated their 60th anniversary, but we're officially getting the official Fantastic Four MCU film later on this year. So I'm glad that we're finally tackling some Fantastic Four. Andy, I'd love to talk about some more Fantastic Four later on this year
Yeah.
because when you take a look at the Marvel characters out there, the Fantastic Four are not really spoken highly as much as, say, the X-Men or Spider-Man. And it's really funny because with me and my comic book upbringing, I didn't really read that much Fantastic Four when I was a kid. But I always loved the Fantastic Four. Maybe it was just because of the fact that they were just such a basic, all American group of characters that you can just love and appreciate. Maybe it's just because of the fact that their powers were just so basic. Maybe it's just because of the fact that they are a family, which makes them just so interesting, whether you read the comics or not. Because I watched the cartoons, I loved the old movies from the early 2000s. There was just something about the Fantastic Four that I personally was so drawn to and attached to. But now, thanks to the Ultimate Journey, I've been reading a lot of Fantastic Four even before the Ultimate Journey began, and I am noticing that there are some creators out there, these ones included, that love these characters and really show us how great the Fantastic Four truly are.
Yeah, it's a really special group. And context here, like you, Steve, I wouldn't call myself the biggest Fantastic Four fan. I haven't read a ton of Fantastic Four in my time with comics, but I really like these characters. Um, Ben Grimm in particular. But but I think that this is a really, really great way to get into them because part of that problem, we talk about all the time, like the new reader who wants to get into comics, and sometimes they have that drive to read an issue one, or they get turned off by a story where they think they need a lot of context. This is a great jump in point, and this is such a great jump in point for Fantastic Four because more than most Marvel, even though Marvel was very cutting edge in what it did for comics at the time, like Fantastic Four 1 is very dated, right, like the original Fantastic Four.
I
it
recently read it, by the way. I picked
yeah,
up
and I
the
mean, look, it's
simile.
it's fun and it's got that Marvel style and it shows you what made it different and stand out. But this this is totally different. This brings it much more in line with what people have started to expect from modern comics. And as you mentioned, with the movie now coming out, which is really funny timing since this had been on our list for months. This is when we were going to do this one. This is definitely going to be informing some of what we're about to see in
So the
some
first,
way.
yeah, right. And so the first big change is the fact that we actually go deeper into these characters' beginnings, because that's something we don't necessarily know about in the original Jack Kirby and Stan Lee stories. And we're immediately taken into the world of Reed Richards as a 10-year-old boy, a boy who is absolutely a super genius, but he's not really in the most wholesome world to showcase his genius. He's being bullied at school. He's got a father who just totally doesn't understand him at all, and a mother who coddles him. And at school, when he's being bullied, he just happens to have, luckily, one good friend who is Ben Grimm, who also is a childhood friend of his in the original story, but this time we really see it full force. And it's really nice to see that Ben is a character that in his school is very respected because he's one of the big athletes. He's one of the big men on campus. But at the same time, I do still appreciate that Bendis and Miller still turn him into that modest, gentle giant with a good heart, which is exactly what Ben Grimm is, bar none.
Yeah, exactly. I love Ben Grimm. I love the character, and I really like this introduction to the character. I'll talk about Reed too, but
Yeah.
this kind of rough childhood, like we get to see that Reed really is smart, but his family life is tumultuous. He doesn't have the respect of his father. His father doesn't understand him. Reed has that chip on his shoulder. This is really great. This is one of those you can only do these stories in comics that were built. But this origin for Reed just adds that little bit of kind of not. It's not like grit. It's not like darkness. It adds some realness, which is what
It's very
Marvel
real.
is really about, right? So it's that kid who feels like he doesn't fit in, and Ben. There's even some friction there in that Reed's father, at least the way it's demonstrated in these issues, wishes Reed were Ben or more like Ben. This is the son that he always envisioned for
Oh yeah,
himself.
he loves Ben.
Yeah, and this kind of friendship that Reed and Ben have, despite that, is one that has a lot of layers to it, which is just so much fun to dig into.
Right. And so, of course, you wouldn't expect any less in this story to see what Reed does to showcase his talents. He participates in the school science fair, which is something you would always anticipate a young Reed Richards to do. And he actually, of course, chooses one of the most outlandish ideas. But the most important thing about Reed is he's the smartest man alive. That's who Reed Richards is. He's called Mr. Fantastic for a reason. And he is showcasing the idea of interdimensional travel and the fact that there are, in fact, other dimensions out there as opposed to just the one that they currently live in. So that is, believe it or not, a massive foreshadowing to our ultimate journey without even knowing it. And he basically is experimenting with little toy cars, and all of a sudden the dream is fulfilled. All of a sudden these men come to the science fair and they actually want to talk to Reed because they said, you know, those little toy cars that you've been sending into these alternate dimensions, well, we found them because we've been doing the exact same thing, and we want you to be part of our think tank, which is also a brand new idea in the world of Fantastic Four, at the Baxter Building in the heart of New York City. Parents are talked to, of course. Father and mother are not really hesitant. One, because of the fact that mother wants good things, and father kind of wants to get rid of him because he can't stand him in the house tearing apart the blender. And so Reed's official journey begins.
And it's perfect because it's an extension of that tumultuous home life thing where we have both Reed's dream really coming true. Like, he gets to devote his time to doing this great work. He gets to be appreciated for what he has, but his parents see him as a means to an end and are excited to be rid of him and just to get something out of it. And so there's this lingering negativity sitting on Reed's shoulder, that kind of colors the dream in a way. But what a great intro to all this. And you're right, from the jump, this is something that's going to be impacting our ultimate journey and where we eventually end up, with Secret Wars. So what a great first issue. It's cool that you have the physical copy with you right there. It's a good one
Oh
to
yeah,
have.
I'm so glad, and of course I'll talk a little bit about more reading that people can do in regards to this book because I did not stop at the end of the first story arc, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. So of course, when they get to the Baxter Building, the person who is in charge of the studies is Dr. Storm, which is definitely a piece that was shown on the failed, horrible Fan Four Stick movie. That's where they actually showcased the fact that the father of Susan and Johnny Storm was also a scientist. And in this story, we see that, and Reed is introduced to the Storm family. And we all know what happens with Reed Richards and the Storm family in the grand lore of the Fantastic Four. So then we actually age them up a little bit. And now they're teenagers and they're doing their studies. And we see not necessarily a love relationship between Sue and Reed, but definitely a very strong friendship between the two of them. The only thing that I'm a little bit displeased by is I don't think we got enough Johnny, you know?
Yeah, so I think that's right, but also I appreciate the fact that they're giving us a chance to let
Right.
the characters breathe. I mean, we in issue one we were able to do Reed and Ben, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Reed still takes center stage, but their relationship is important. And I think we don't get all that much Johnny, at least for a while.
Mm-hmm.
But I think they're doing that same kind of spotlighting a pair in this issue as well.
Mm-hmm.
Which is not to say that they don't introduce some other characters as well here that I'm sure we're going to talk about next.
Right. And of course, the other big difference that we get in this story in Ultimate as opposed to regular is how the Fantastic Four actually gets their powers. Because in the original story from 1961, the four of them are science colleagues, and Ben is like an esteemed pilot, very decorated, and they go into space and they're hit with cosmic rays, and that's how they get their powers. This is a very different story because Ben will eventually reunite with them, which is really nice. And the best
Mhm.
part is that when Ben sees Reed for the first time in a long time, it's like he's seeing his brother again for the first time. It's so nice to see that the kinship remained, because like
Mhm.
that's one of the few things as adults that we always wish, like we always hope to be the fortunate ones to have like old childhood friends for years and years and years. You know what I mean? That's something that's
Mhm.
really,
Mhm.
really hard to do, but when you get that, it's wonderful. And then they basically are going to travel into this new dimension that they've been studying and testing for years, ever since the Baxter Building and rediscovered it. They're going to go into what they call the negative zone.
Yeah, and again, the negative zone really, I mean, that's kind of like what our tease was at the end of issue one, and really will impact not just Secret Wars, but also become a major force of Marvel need and lore kind of from here out. And also, you're right, Steve, to talk about the different ways that they've come to their powers in this one. It connects them more to it, but there's that same heart to the way the powers come about here, right? Which is it's the science experiment gone wrong, and science related, which I think is really really nice, and it becomes more meaningful in this version of the story, in that it's something that we got to see from a young age. Reed has been building to, and this is that dream. Not to mention a major part of the reason why things go wrong now ties to their very origin, a major antagonist who is going to be the defining force of the rest of this journey in many ways. And he comes in here.
Yes, there's actually two very interesting figures that are actually introduced to us before they officially go into the negative zone. One of
That's
them
true.
happens to be one of the other students in the think tank, and that is Victor Von Doom.
Mm-hmm.
That's number one. But the other one is a very disgruntled doctor who happens to be fired in front of all the kids because of the fact that they apparently just don't like what this guy's been doing. And that's Dr. Arthur Molkovic,
Yeah,
also known as the Mole Man, who
right.
also is the very first villain that the Fantastic Four ever encounters in the original comics. So I like the fact that they still wanted to make this character an integral part of the first story arc. And also
Yeah.
just seeing a young Victor Von Doom, because that's the thing. I don't know too much about the original Stan Lee and Jack Kirby story, so I really don't know where Victor Von Doom comes into the comics, and I don't really know what his original relationships to Reed Richards is, even if there is one in the original books.
Yeah, and we're not going to get that in these issues, really. What I was hinting at mostly is that since Victor Von Doom is a student here as well, one of the members of this fellowship, it's it's his input in this experiment that leads to the difficulty. So it ties him into the Fantastic Four from the jump, which is a nice change from the simple cosmic rays thing. But yeah, for the purposes of this story arc, we're going to be talking about Mole Man more. And that's going to be our focus of this very specific, step of the journey that we are looking into. But it is Doctor Doom who is going to have the larger ramifications for the future of what we're going to
Exactly.
be discussing. Nevertheless, it's another great example of the year oneification of these characters and letting us have that initial adventure that resembles what the origin of the characters, the original characters, looked like too.
And there's already a rivalry between Reed and Victor, because
Yep.
Victor basically just goes into Reed's room and starts screwing around with his calculations. And I'm just glad that they didn't try and do the love triangle thing in the early portion. You see, that's one of the few things that was so cliche about the Fantastic Four, because Sue is, even though she really is a strong female character, they always tried to just make her the damsel in distress.
Yeah, yeah, I
but
get it.
but obviously, so Victor basically shows Reed, your calculations are wrong, try it this way. Even though Reed doesn't think that they're the right way to go, he still ends up doing those specific calculations when they officially do their test on the negative zone. And the only reason why he did it is probably because he simply just was not sure, that he doubted himself, because that was one of Reed's weakest characteristics, and that's just because of his upbringing.
Mhm.
Even though he is a brilliant mind and he can do incredible things, he has been instilled so much self-doubt and he
Hmm.
doesn't know if what if he's wrong. That's his biggest concern. So he uses Victor's calculations, and it basically causes bad things to happen. And then before you know it, all four of them, meaning Reed, Stu, Johnny, Ben, and yes, even Victor. Victor's a part of this too. All of a sudden, they're gone, except for Reed,
Who is now stretchy.
who can stretch. That's the thing. He discovers
Who
his
is now
powers. He is now
stretchy.
Mr. He is now the Marvel version of Plastic Man.
Yeah. And we have this additional layer to create another kind of, complication here, which is we also lose track of everybody.
Mm-hmm.
So then our new kind of, obstacle to get through here is literally finding a way to get the gang back together and discovering along the way what has happened to them. And I'm clicking through because I have a digital version.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got the pages up here. This is our click back to Ben Grimm at this point. He's the first one we get to see other than
Mm-hmm.
Reed when we go into these next stories. And I think a really strong return to the character to show, just how powerful he's become. This is a
Yeah.
really good introduction to say, okay, so the guy was built like a linebacker before, now he's something more.
Mm-hmm.
and and I like these kind of tableau scenes that let us understand we already knew these, well, a little bit less with Johnny, but we know these characters from the past, so there's that layer on top of it. But we've already had a couple of issues now to sit with these new versions of the characters and get to understand them. Now we're layering on how their powers are going to be now on top of it. I think it's really well done.
Yeah, actually, there was one thing towards the end of the story arc that I never would have thought about, which I absolutely think was wonderful and brilliant. It makes me wonder if this was something that Lee and Kirby actually thought about back in '61 when they actually made these characters, but I never knew that the Fantastic Four, that each of their powers embodies the four elements. I never would have thought of that. I thought
Yeah,
that
I,
was simply
I
brilliant.
wonder. I wonder if that was going through the heads. I mean, it does, so that's really cool. But I don't know if that would have been a factor to it at the time. But it's so natural, and it's one of those things that is great about the recontextualization that the Ultimate Universe does. You can kind of be a little more explicit with some of that stuff. And if it doesn't add anything story wise, it definitely adds something emotionally to it, something else that you can just kind of conceive of with what these powers are and what they do.
So we see the Thing officially become himself, and we see the Human Torch officially become himself in different parts of the world. They're found, they're picked up, they're brought back to the Baxter Building, and then things start to go a little bit astray. One, because of the fact that they still haven't found Sue, and Ben is now 100% pissed off at Reed because of what's become of him. And that's probably one of the most memorable page spreads in the comics. Just the hulking body of Thing just running. You can feel him running towards Reed, trying to strangle him. Like, how you did this to me, I'm gonna kill you. And that's like, it's a heartbreaking moment, but at the same time it's a beautifully artistic part of the book, and that's
Mhm.
probably one of the most memorable scenes in the entirety of the series
It
for this
is, and
arc.
yeah, it is, and also it kind of gets to the core of this kind of constant struggle that Ben is going to have, where he doesn't have that off switch that the others have to be able to live that normal life. So this is this like othering that Ben has to deal with that the rest of the Fantastic Four don't, which is he is now changed. They're all forever changed, but he's lost everything, and that's what Ben is so angry about when he comes out to break through the wall and try to strangle Reed. It's that his well, I'm flipping through to the scene. What he says is, my life is, it's like, this is your fault. How did this happen? My life is over, is what he's trying to say here. It's completely changed. And unlike Reed, Ben presumably kind of a cool, life, kind of doing well, but anyway. I really love this. And of course, still looking for Sue. So there's this underlying tension now throughout the rest of the story where this is kind of that unifying thing, though.
Yeah, because we did eventually find out where Sue is, and then we realize that it's not necessarily just the calculations of Victor that caused this to happen. We find out that Sue is actually underground, underneath the Baxter building. She's literally right under
Right
their
there.
noses, and they never would have known that. And we are officially introduced to Dr. Molkovic as his alter ego, the Mole Man, and then we see exactly what he was doing that caused him to get thrown out of the Baxter building, which was he was actually creating life. He was creating these brainless creatures that only follow him and understand him, and they are his mole people from the original story. And I will say that when you see this scene underground for the first time, it is, once again, I have to give so much props to Kubert and Mickey because they did such an incredible job with the art on this book. It's so fluid, it's so dynamic, it's very detailed. I mean, Kubert is one of the greatest pencilers out there, and Danny Mickey, you know, he did great work for Image. To have him come back to Marvel and work on the Ultimate Universe was wonderful, but some of this imagery is just gobsmacking. Like, it's beautiful to look at, and it's horrifying when you see Mole Man's lair for the first time.
Yeah, it's this real kind of like body horror, grotesque, but very detailed and very well done. It's impossible to turn away. But yeah, the everything about his mole people is intensely off-putting, and really kind of elevates it to that true villain, that works for this first arc, makes it more menacing.
Yep.
And I think that I like, we're talking about he was involved a little bit more in the initial you know origin story. So it's still Victor's contributions to the formulas that led to the mistakes that granted the powers, but the reason that Sue is taken away from everyone is apparently Mole Man just took her before
Yeah, because Mole Man
before
apparently
anyone
loves,
noticed
because
that.
Mole Man loves her in some sick and twisted, perverted way.
He just took her.
Yeah.
Susan, I love you. Creepy.
But you want to know what that is? That's a love letter to classic comic books. You know,
Yeah.
that's one of the few points in the book where you've gotten this truly real, down to earth, modern story, even though it involves superpowers and crazy fantasy. And then you get one of these moments that comes right out of the
Yeah.
Silver Age of comics, which reminds you of what the Fantastic Four was and what made them so popular. It's also when Ben, Johnny, and Reed go on their rescue mission for Sue. That's when you get that classic comic book banter and some of those really fun. There's some really funny moments when they're descending underground under the Baxter building.
Yeah, yeah. And this is so after that scene introduced, we kick into our fifth issue, which is mostly action.
Yeah, it's great.
We've everyone, it's like we talk about this, we talk about the events here, we talk about this. Issue 4 is probably about a quarter of the dialogue of the last couple issues, as we just see them fighting and showing off their powers. And it's cool because it's really earned. And I also, what I really like about it is, talking as someone who, and again, I'm couching this, it's not that I don't like the Fantastic Four, it's just that I'm not as familiar with them. I don't call them one of my absolute favorites. I don't have a encyclopedic knowledge of them. But part of it is, personally, sometimes I can feel that the powers of the Fantastic Four aren't as interesting as some of my preferred characters. Doing a big action set piece like this and letting it take up almost the entirety of this issue elevates and shows how they can work alongside the rest of the Marvel universe and be like, oh, wait, these people are serious threats. You can tell stories about someone that, is not an Omega level mutant and still have them be incredibly cool, right?
Right.
So it's not just that, like, summer blockbuster action piece that is fun as a comic fan. It is that, but it's also actually really accomplishing something with these characters, which is cool. So it's great that it took until this issue to get it to us
But
because
the other,
it's worth
yeah.
more.
But the other thing that I personally have noticed, especially when you take a look at some of the creative minds that you see that are part of the Ultimate Universe and people that actually are part of the road to Secret Wars, they all seem to have a deep love for the Fantastic Four. And I think it's just because of the fact that what the Fantastic Four does is they encompass everything that is pure fantasy about comic books. I mean, in the world of DC, that's where you think of characters like Superman, but in the world of Marvel, you don't necessarily think of the X-Men or you don't necessarily think of Spider-Man when it comes to those pure fantastical, mythical storytelling kind of elements. You go to the Fantastic Four for those kinds of moments in comic books. And that's why the minds behind Secret Wars, this is one of the few things I'm going to do a minor spoiler for, folks. The Fantastic Four are a major contributing factor to the road to Secret Wars. This is just the beginning of our story here. But the Fantastic Four are there throughout because these creators simply adore these characters. I
Yeah,
mean,
and I
yeah,
think the word I want to add, Steve, is also there's a reverence for these characters, right? It's clear that they are fans, but it's also clear that they respect them and need to
yeah,
put them into a place of importance. And that's kind of the part of it I wanted to get at too. But I
you're
think
right.
you are exactly right. I'm just adding something there. I'm not taking
No, you had
anything
that's
away.
important to say.
Yeah.
So yeah, we get an excellent action sequence. I also think the very interesting twist here was in the original comic book, um, they don't bring the fight to the villain. The villain comes up from underground to the surface and starts to do the damage. In this one, it's exactly the opposite. They bring the fight down underground to him. And also, of course, the most important thing is that Sue discovers her powers.
Yep.
And that's another thing I loved so much about this group. There is a lot more complexity to Sue's powers. It's not just the fact that she turns herself invisible. There's so much more to her powers that make her a much more powerful hero than most people think she is.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, and maybe that's where some of the reverence comes in too. And as I alluded to, like you don't need to be an Omega level mutant to have a cool story and show off cool powers, but it doesn't hurt to be able to do a little bit more. So you're right. This is another place where it kind of diverges from the main Marvel universe, which not for nothing, it's actually important for us to point out those things due to the nature of what Secret Wars is and where we'll eventually get. So it's important for us to keep that context too.
Yeah. And the story basically ends with them realizing that this is a new age for them. They now officially have to work with what they've got, get back to work, and more importantly, find out where the hell Victor is because they got to bring him home. That's the most important thing they've got to do right now.
So I'll tell you, Steve, as we reach the end of this, I loved reading this.
Yeah.
This is as far as I've read. I know you've read more into Fantastic Four to give people an idea of what else is out there,
Yeah.
which I think I'm probably gonna want to do because I had so much fun with this first kind of jaunt into Fantastic Four. Um, but broad strokes, like I opened with, this is so cool.
It
This
is.
is like really this is comics with that modern twist on top of it that really lets you enjoy, I think, as a current day reader, everything that made the original Fantastic Four alluring at the time. It's freshened for now and it's really well done. I loved reading this. This was so much fun.
Yeah, and not for nothing. I mean, knowing how many Ultimate books that I read, I still think that the Fantastic Four are the best written characters in the Ultimate Universe, at least for me. I mean, I also
There's
forgot
stiff
to even,
competition.
yeah,
You can be right. It's a decent take, but like it's stiff competition.
and I mean, I also completely forgot to even, I didn't even think about it up until now. They clearly brought this book out at the exact right moment because this was the year that the Tim Story Fantastic Four film hit theaters.
Mm,
So the fact that that movie came out, the Fantastic Four were already being talked about outside of comic books. So the fact that they just waited a little while to bring the Fantastic Four into the Ultimate Universe was a solid choice to do. And going back to what you said a little bit earlier, so I read the first 18 issues
mm-hmm.
of Ultimate Fantastic Four. The first three story arcs, the second story arc was actually written by Warren Ellis, which was actually a different writer, but still very well done story. I think the first 18 issues are really cool because you get a little bit more of Victor Von Doom's story, and you also get a little bit more insight into the negatives, though. But after I finished issue 18, I just basically said to myself, I think I can stop right here. I mean, unfortunately, I heard that this book came into the world like a lion, but ended like a lamb because this book had been switching a lot of hands over time. Mark Miller came back to the book to write a little bit more, but it's not just this book, it's also what happened with the whole Ultimate Universe entirely after they hit the Ultimatum storyline, and
Mm-hmm.
we'll get into that a little bit later on. But yeah, that Ultimate Fantastic Four is a fantastic read, pun intended. And I love everything about it. The writing's great, the art is great, the story is perfectly paced, and it's everything that someone who just appreciates the Fantastic Four and never even picked up a Fantastic Four comic, this is a great place to go in the world of comics if you want to read a great Fantastic Four story. I mean, we'll be reading some other really great Fantastic Four stories soon, but this is definitely one of the good ones.
Oh yeah, definitely. And really, really important for our whole journey, but really just a fun experience in and of itself. And not that this is a review, but to go the review route, a real great reminder of what Marvel is at Marvel's best for people who are looking to get into comics and see what just some well-written characters in a weird situation, but still being, down to earth in how they respond to crazy stuff around them, the Marvel way, right?
Absolutely.
This is wonderful. So I'm really glad we read this.
I'm glad
It's going to be
I'm really
important.
glad you enjoyed it too. I'm
Yeah.
so glad, Andy, because I am still going to say that I think when it comes to comic knowledge, I think you have a little bit more than I do. But I'm just really glad that there are some things that you are actually reading for the first time. And I'm just
Yeah.
very happy that you are enjoying them as much as I did, maybe even a little bit more. I personally think that your passion and your appreciation for Emerald Twilight was 10 times better than me. But I'm
Yeah.
glad you love it.
Plug for our other Ultimate Journey. If you're watching this, check out our Blackest Night Ultimate Journey. But
Yes,
yeah, I am I am loving both of these journeys. What a great thing to do. Talking about a good place to get in the comics. Follow along with this. If anyone out there is interested, it's really fun. This is a digestible way to do
very
a
much.
major decade spanning story arc. In one of the most accessible bite-sized ways you can. But that's what these are. At the end of the day, these comics are fun. This is entertaining, and what a
Right.
great way to spend a little bit of time.
And that's going to wrap up another episode of The Ultimate Journey. We will be back very soon. We'll be going back to the road to Blackest Night. I'm really excited for our next chapter there because we're going to be reading the first story that actually includes the brainchild behind the Blackest Night story itself. So it's going to be very interesting to see one of Geoff Johns' first pieces that he put together in DC Comics in the next chapter. But clearly, guys, you're going to have to join us for that next video. And thank you very much for watching. Leave your comments in the box below. Let us know if you've read The Ultimate Fantastic Four, if you've read any of the Ultimate Universe books at all, Are you reading the current Ultimate Universe? Because I would highly recommend Ultimate Spider-Man to anybody out there. It's such a great read. And are you looking forward to the new movie coming out this summer? But in the meantime, just like, leave, subscribe, hit that notification bell so you're up to date with all of our latest content, and we'll see you in the next one.
Take it easy.